I fell in love with a homeless man. New York City never stops. It moves like a machine, swallowing people whole. I used to love that. The predictability, the routine, the illusion of control. But one night changed everything. One encounter shattered everything I thought I knew about love, privilege, and fate. This is not just my story. It's a story about how love can find you in the most unexpected places, how it can challenge everything you believe in, and how sometimes the person who has nothing at all can give you the one thing you never knew you needed. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. If you've ever experienced love in the most unexpected way, let me know in the comments below. Now, let's get into it. New York City was built to be admired from above. Rooftops, penthouses, skyline views. But no one tells you what it looks like when you walk through the streets at night, where the city reveals its cracks, its forgotten corners, its ghosts. That's where I saw him. I was walking home after a long day at the firm, my tie loosened, my mind still stuck in emails and schedules. The streets near my apartment were polished, filled with bright lights and high-end stores. But one wrong turn, and suddenly, everything changed. He was sitting on the cold pavement, back against the wall of an abandoned storefront. His hoodie was pulled over his head, his jeans ripped, not in a fashionable way, but in a way that spoke of time and hardship. A worn-out backpack sat beside him, probably holding everything he owned. I should have kept walking. That's what I always did. That's what everyone did. But something made me stop. His eyes. Even in the dim light, they burned with something fierce, something that made me forget everything else. Before I could second-guess myself, I stepped closer. "Are you hungry?" He lifted his head slightly, eyes narrowing as if trying to decide whether I was serious. Then he let out a quiet chuckle. "Is that a real question or just an awkward way to avoid looking guilty?" His voice was rough, but there was humor in it, a sharpness. "It's an offer." He tilted his head, studying me. I could feel his gaze moving over my suit, my watch, the way I stood too stiffly, as if I didn't belong here. "All right," he finally said. "But no fancy places, just a burger and coffee." I nodded, and without another word, he stood up, brushing off his jeans. He moved with a certain ease, like someone who had learned how to carry himself despite everything. We walked in silence to a 24-hour diner a few blocks away. It was the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and nostalgia, with sticky tables and a jukebox in the corner. He slid into the booth across from me, his hoodie still pulled up. I watched as he took his first bite. It wasn't just hunger, it was something else. Like he was savoring a rare moment of normalcy. "What's your name?" I asked. He hesitated before answering. "Noah." The name landed in my chest in a way I didn't expect. "I'm Daniel." He gave me a quick glance, but didn't say anything. Instead, he took a sip of coffee, his fingers wrapped around the cup like it was the only warm thing he had felt in days. I hesitated before asking, "How long have you been living like this?" His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered. "That's a complicated question. I like complicated answers." He let out a small breath, shaking his head. "Long enough to know that most people don't really want to hear them." I didn't know what to say to that. He was right. Most people avoided looking, let alone listening. "I do," I said quietly. For the first time, he looked directly at me. Really looked. It was unnerving, like he was peeling away layers I didn't even know I had. Then he smirked. "Careful, Daniel. If you say things like that to someone like me, you might get stuck in this conversation for longer than you planned." I should have laughed it off. I should have finished my coffee and walked away. But I didn't. because for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to. I should have walked away. That's what people do in situations like this. Get a glimpse into a life they don't understand, offer a token gesture of kindness, and then return to their own world, untouched. But I didn't leave. Noah fascinated me in a way I couldn't explain. He wasn't just some guy down on his luck. There was something deeper beneath the worn-out hoodie and guarded smirk. We sat in the diner for longer than I expected. He ate slowly, like someone who had learned to make every bite last. I found myself watching him more than I should have, drawn to the way his fingers tapped against the coffee cup, the way his eyes flickered with something unreadable. "So, what's your story?" I asked, leaning back in my seat. Noah raised an eyebrow, a small smirk tugging at his lips. "You think people like me have stories, Daniel?" "I think everyone does." He exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "All right, let's see. I'm 26, I like black coffee, and I've been on the streets for about a year. That enough for you?" It wasn't. "Why?" I pressed. His fingers tightened around the cup. For a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he let out a quiet chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "Because life happens. Because sometimes you have everything, and then one day you don't." I waited for more, but he didn't elaborate. His walls were up, and I wasn't sure if I had the right to push. "And you?" Noah's eyes met mine, sharp and assessing. "What's your story, Daniel?" I wasn't used to being on the other side of the conversation. 32, lawyer. Spend most of my life in an office, then come home to an apartment that's too big for one person. Noah hummed, tilting his head slightly. "Sounds lonely." I opened my mouth to argue, but hesitated. Was it? I had a successful career, a comfortable life. I wasn't supposed to feel lonely, but I did. I cleared my throat. "I guess it is." Noah studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Then I guess we're not so different." The words caught me off guard. "You really think that?" His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Loneliness doesn't care how much money you have, Daniel." The conversation lingered between us, unspoken but heavy. I wasn't sure what to do with the way his words made me feel. We eventually left the diner, stepping out into the cold night air. The city buzzed around us, cars honking, distant sirens wailing, the hum of neon signs flickering above us. But all I could focus on was Noah. "You have somewhere to go?" I asked. He gave me a knowing look. If I did, would I be sleeping on the streets? It was a stupid question, but I hated the idea of him disappearing back into the shadows of the city. I hesitated before saying, "I have a guest room." His head tilted slightly, curiosity flickering in his expression. "Are you serious?" "Yeah." Noah let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "You don't even know me." "I don't need to." He studied me again, longer this time, like he was searching for something. "And what do you get out of this, Daniel?" It was a fair question. Maybe I was just another privileged guy trying to make myself feel better. Maybe this was some misguided attempt to fix something I didn't understand. But the truth was simpler than that. "Company," I admitted. Noah's smirk faltered for the first time. His defenses cracked, just a little. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair before muttering, "You're either the dumbest guy I've ever met, or you're just really bad at being selfish." I smiled. Maybe a bit of both. For a moment I thought he would say no, that he'd vanish into the night, leaving me standing there with nothing but questions. But then he nodded. "All right, lawyer boy, let's see if you regret this." As we walked toward my apartment, I had the strange feeling that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't predict. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. Bringing Noah into my apartment felt like stepping over an invisible line. one that separated the world I had built for myself from something entirely unknown. I wasn't the kind of person who made impulsive decisions, and yet, here I was, unlocking the door to my perfectly curated life, letting a stranger in. Noah hesitated in the hallway, his shoulders tense as if stepping inside was somehow a risk. His eyes scanned the space, high ceilings, minimalist decor, the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. "Didn't expect it to look like a showroom." I let out a small chuckle, setting my keys on the counter. "Yeah, well, I don't spend much time here." Noah glanced at me, curiosity flickering in his expression. "Figures." I led him to the guest room, flipping on the light. It was neat, barely touched, with crisp white sheets and a window overlooking the city. It had always been just another unused space in my home. But now it felt different, like it was waiting for someone to claim it. Noah stood in the doorway, hands shoved into the pockets of his hoodie. "You sure about this? You need a place to sleep, and I have an empty room. It's not that complicated." He let out a quiet laugh, but there was something behind it, something unreadable. "Everything's complicated, Daniel." I didn't argue. Instead, I stepped aside, giving him space to decide. He finally sighed, walking into the room. He didn't sit on the bed right away, as if testing whether this was real. "Bathroom's down the hall," I said. "There are clean towels if you want to shower." Noah nodded, but didn't move. His fingers brushed against the edge of the nightstand, his body language wary. "I'll be in the kitchen," I added, sensing he needed a moment alone. I left him there, closing the door softly behind me. I was pouring myself a glass of whiskey when I heard the shower turn on. The sound echoed through the quiet apartment, and for some reason, it made my chest feel tight. Noah was here, in my home. I had spent years constructing a life that felt safe, structured, everything in its place. And now, there was someone in my guest room who didn't fit into any part of my plan. And yet, I didn't regret it. I sat on the couch, swirling the whiskey in my glass, trying to make sense of the restless energy running through me. 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps. I looked up just as Noah stepped into the living room. He had showered, his dark hair still damp, curling slightly at the ends. He was wearing the clothes I had lent him, gray sweatpants and a t-shirt that fit a little too big on his lean frame. I wasn't expecting the sight to hit me the way it did. He looked different, like the rough edges of his reality had softened just for a moment. "Feel better?" I asked, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. Noah shrugged, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, feels weird though. Been a while since I've been this clean." I frowned at his words, but he didn't seem to be looking for pity. "Whiskey?" I offered, lifting my glass. Noah raised an eyebrow. "That a test?" I smirked. "Should it be?" He huffed out a laugh and walked over, dropping onto the couch across from me. "Fine, one drink. But if I wake up and all my organs are missing, I'm haunting you." I snorted, pouring him a glass. He took a sip, letting out a small, satisfied sigh. "Okay, I get it," he admitted. "Rich people whiskey is pretty good." I chuckled, leaning back. "So, how long do I have before you decide this is too weird and leave?" Noah twirled the glass in his hands, considering. "Haven't decided yet." I studied him, the way he looked more at ease now, the way his fingers rested against the rim of the glass. "You don't trust me," I said, not as a question but as a fact. Noah's eyes flicked up to meet mine. "Should I?" The air between us shifted. I should have said something reassuring, something logical. But instead, I just held his gaze. "I don't know," I admitted. Noah smirked, but it was softer this time. At least you're honest. We sat there in silence, the city buzzing faintly outside. And for the first time in years, my apartment didn't feel quite so empty. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Maybe it was out of habit, or maybe it was because, for the first time in years, I wasn't alone in my apartment. I found Noah in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, a cup of coffee in his hands. His hair was still a mess from sleep, and he looked comfortable, like he belonged. It was a strange sight. This man who had spent the last year sleeping on the streets now standing in my kitchen as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Morning," I said, pouring myself a cup. Noah glanced at me, lips quirking up in a lazy smirk. "Didn't peg you as a morning person?" "I'm not. But I have a job that forces me to pretend." He took a sip of coffee, humming in approval. "Well, thanks for not making me sleep on the floor." I scoffed. "That would be a pretty bad look for me, don't you think? The successful lawyer who invites a homeless guy over and then makes him sleep on the floor?" Noah chuckled. "Guess so." He hesitated, then set his cup down. "Look, Daniel, I appreciate this, really, but you don't owe me anything." I leaned against the counter, watching him. "I know." His gaze flickered as if he was trying to figure out why I was doing this. I wasn't sure I had an answer. "What's your plan?" I asked after a moment. Noah sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You mean for today? Or, like, my entire life?" "Both." He let out a dry laugh. "Well, today I was gonna drink your coffee and maybe steal one of those muffins I saw in your pantry." "Fair enough." I took a sip of my coffee. "And after that?" Noah's smirk faded. He exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders. "Honestly, I don't know." His words sat between us, heavy with something unspoken. I didn't want him to leave. I didn't want him to feel like he had to. "You can stay," I said before I could second-guess it. "At least until you figure things out." Noah's eyes met mine, guarded. "Why?" I hesitated. There were a dozen reasons I could have given him, some logical, some not, but none of them felt right. "Because I want you to," I admitted. Something shifted in Noah's expression, but he didn't push. He just nodded. "All right. For now." For the next few days, Noah stayed. It wasn't like we had planned it. He just never left, and I never asked him to. He made himself at home in ways I hadn't expected. He took long showers, borrowed my clothes, and stole my coffee when he thought I wasn't looking. I liked it, more than I should have. One night we were sitting on the couch, some random movie playing in the background. I wasn't paying attention to it. I was paying attention to him. Noah sat with one leg tucked under him, fingers absent-mindedly playing with the hem of his borrowed hoodie. My hoodie. "So, what's your deal?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. I raised an eyebrow. "My deal?" "Yeah, you're this successful lawyer with a ridiculous apartment and a perfect life, but you let a guy like me crash on your couch. Why?" I should have laughed it off. I should have given him some throwaway answer. But instead, I said the truth. Maybe my life isn't as perfect as it looks. Noah tilted his head, studying me. "Lonely?" I exhaled a soft chuckle. "Something like that." He nodded, as if he understood more than he let on. The air between us changed. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged with something I couldn't quite name. I realized then that I wanted him to stay. Not just for a few days, not just until he figured things out. I wanted him, and I had no idea what to do about it. Noah had been staying with me for over a week now. What started as a temporary arrangement, something casual and undefined, had turned into a quiet routine neither of us acknowledged out loud. He didn't talk about leaving, and I didn't ask him to. Some nights, we'd sit on the couch, pretending to care about whatever movie was playing, but the truth was, I wasn't watching the screen. I was watching him. The way he stretched out lazily, like he had always belonged there. The way his fingers drummed against his knee when he was deep in thought. The way he caught me staring and smirked like he knew something I didn't. One night, we ordered takeout and ate in the living room, boxes spread across the coffee table. The city lights flickered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a soft glow across Noah's face as he leaned back against the couch. "You ever wonder how different your life would be if one thing had changed?" he asked, twirling a chopstick between his fingers. I glanced at him, caught off guard by the sudden shift in conversation. "Like what?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe if I had taken that job I was offered a few years ago. Maybe if I hadn't trusted the wrong people. Maybe if I had—" He stopped himself, shaking his head like he had already said too much. I wanted to ask what happened, but I didn't. I'd learned that pushing Noah only made him shut down, so I tried a different approach. If I had taken a different job after law school, I wouldn't be here. I'd probably be in D.C., working ridiculous hours, never stopping to breathe. He arched an eyebrow. "So, this life was your second choice?" I thought about it for a second before shaking my head. "No, I just think we convince ourselves there's a plan, that we're in control. But it's all just chance." Noah smirked. "That's real deep, lawyer boy." I chuckled, taking a sip of my drink. "What about you? What about me? If things had gone differently, where would you be?" His smirk faltered, and for the first time he looked unsure of what to say. "I don't know," he admitted, staring at the skyline. "But I know I wouldn't be here." I didn't know what he meant by that. I didn't know if here meant my apartment or something deeper, something harder to explain. A comfortable silence settled between us, but it didn't last. Noah shifted on the couch, stretching out his legs, his knee brushing against mine. It wasn't intentional. At least, I didn't think it was. But neither of us moved. I should have. I should have leaned away, should have made a joke, should have done anything but sit there, feeling the warmth of his body so close to mine. Noah's gaze flickered toward me, a question in his eyes. I felt my pulse quicken. This was the moment, the kind that you don't plan for, the kind that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like gravity was pulling us toward something neither of us wanted to name. Noah didn't move, but he didn't pull away either. "Daniel," he said quietly, my name rolling off his tongue like a warning, or maybe an invitation. I swallowed hard. "Yeah?" His eyes locked onto mine, intense and unreadable. A second passed, then another, and then he shifted, barely, just enough to make me wonder if I was imagining it, just enough to make me want more. I had never felt this kind of pull toward anyone before. It wasn't just attraction. It was something deeper, something unspoken and dangerous and impossible to ignore. I could have kissed him. I wanted to. But before I could do anything, Noah let out a breath, shaking his head as if breaking out of a trance. "I should go to bed," he muttered, standing up quickly, avoiding my gaze. The moment shattered, just like that. I watched him walk away, disappearing into the guest room without another word. I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my face, heart still pounding. I had never been more sure of something in my life. I wanted him, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could pretend otherwise. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, Noah, sitting so close to me, his knee brushing against mine, his eyes locked onto mine like he was daring me to do something about it, and I hadn't. By the time morning came, I was exhausted, but I still found myself in the kitchen, waiting for him like an idiot. When he finally walked in, his hair still messy from sleep, wearing my hoodie like it was his, I knew I was done pretending. He hesitated when he saw me, then grabbed a mug and poured himself some coffee. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, I broke the silence. "Noah." He stopped, his fingers tightening around the mug. "Yeah?" I swallowed hard. "Last night." "Forget it." He cut in quickly, shaking his head. "It was nothing." But it wasn't nothing. I stepped closer. "Then why did you leave?" Noah let out a small, frustrated laugh, rubbing a hand over his face. "Because, Daniel, this, us, whatever the hell this is, it's not supposed to happen." "Why not?" I challenged. "Because guys like you don't fall for guys like me." I took another step forward, closing the space between us. "Then maybe I'm not the guy you think I am." Noah met my gaze, and for the first time I saw it. Fear. Not of me, but of whatever this was between us. I reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. He didn't. My fingers brushed against his. His breath hitched. And then, finally, he moved. It wasn't slow. It wasn't hesitant. It was desperate, messy, full of everything we had been holding back. His hands gripped my shirt, pulling me against him, and my fingers tangled in his hair as I kissed him like I had wanted to from the very beginning. He tasted like coffee and something else, something I wanted to get lost in. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "You're insane," he murmured. I smiled. "Yeah, but so are you." Noah let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "Guess we're both screwed then." "Yeah," I agreed. "But maybe we don't have to run from it anymore." He didn't answer right away, but then he nodded, just barely. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be.